we're just going to give you a little taste of the kind of stuff we do together in ministry. And it's like a lot of different threads come together into one fabric, I would say. So I have a life as a speaker and writer around issues of leadership. I was a senior leader for a long time as a president of colleges and universities for 30 years, and also as the chairman of a huge healthcare organization that kept me nearly as busy. Now in semi-retirement, I'm a coach. I work for the Aspen Institute as a senior fellow, and I coach college and university presidents on how to do good work without getting fired, which is a hard job in America right now. It's very politically hot in higher education these days. But I also had a music life all my life, and I was fortunate enough that God brought me into contact with lots of wonderful musicians like Jason and Stu here. Stu and I connected 25 years ago, starting up a church that our children would go to. We call that Loud Church. So we ran the rock and roll band, led worship and all that sort of stuff. We've kind of mellowed and found our ways into quiet church now. Yes. It suits me better. And then Jason's been a professional musician pretty much all his life. And is one of the finest fiddle players you'll ever find. He's played for everybody. And so we bring him along to make us sound better. And putting those things together, our professional life, our music life, my speaking life, all those things, writing life, that's been kind of a big project that God's been in charge of, and we just kind of wonder at it all and watch it come together. So you may not be used to people combining those things, poetry, storytelling, music, and content. Though I imagine if it doesn't work in Ireland, it won't work anywhere. This is a storytelling culture, isn't it? Story. And that's what I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about the project of my life that God gave me many years ago. And it really is trying to understand the nature of work. What's work about? Why do we do it? What does it do to us? Is it a curse or a blessing? How do we engage our work as godly people? These are good questions, I think, and they came on me very early in my life. And that's what I want to talk to you about, but I want to make sure I'm talking to you where you are. So some of you made me feel young. A few of you make me feel old. So how many of you are essentially, maybe not completely, but essentially retired? It's a goodly number. How many of you are failing at retirement? A few. And how many of you are in the throes of your work life? Okay, that's the majority, but not a huge majority. So I'm going to try to speak to all of you at once at work in a way that's helpful to you. And I'm going to start with a poem. As I was all through my career been thinking about this, one of my teachers has been the men around me. And my wife's father, Bob, had the simplest career I ever saw. My dad had a very complicated career. We moved almost every year. I won't go into why, but we would say he was peripatetic. But Jane's father was as stable as you could possibly imagine. He had one job in his entire life. He lived in the house adjacent to his mother's house on the farm, which he built. I remember sitting in his living room one time, late at night, he was working on this dusty old ledger. And I said, what's that about? He said, it's the cemetery records. I'm chairman of the cemetery committee. He's a guy who only went to one church in his entire life. Chairman of the cemetery committee. And I thought, well, that's an interesting job. And I said, well, how long have you been chairman? He said, 35 years. I'd never lived anywhere for 35 months. So it was a completely different look at things. So I learned a lot watching him. Some of it really good, some of it a little frightening for me. So this is about him. He was a brick man. He sold brick, laid brick, made brick, had to do with brick. He was interested in it. We'd go to dinner at night, and walk into the restaurant and Bob would be lagging behind, inspecting the brick, right, on the restaurant walls. So I wrote this to him. Listen carefully. Brickwork, this is called. It wasn't a work I had chosen. I was young, and the job came to hand, like each new raspy-edged brick. And I was taken with the challenge of the craft, head down to lay to a line, straight and square, feeling the grain of baked earth and handling the sanded mud with quick, smart flicks and jabs. A precision boxer working a square ring, mastering tools and letting them master me. Hammer, level, and trowel. Focusing until every cell is in the rhythm, speed, economy of motion, each brick leading to the next, no hesitation, no space between the notes, and all notes the same. Brick to brick, course to course, year stacked on year, until I take on the very texture of brick, the grit of mortar, rigid joints and flat face of the wall, no view but the brick, no plan but the brick, no dream but the brick. And then the walls at last connect, and there is nothing to do but to set the iron bars in the tiny high window and wait for the end. What I try to capture in that poem is that work can be such a blessing. The joy of mastering the craft and making something, a contribution of some kind. And almost imperceptibly, if we're not careful, it can become a curse, in this case, a prison. It's interesting. Blessing and curse. How do we choose? How do we know? Especially when we're not alone in our work. I had a friend named Richard. We had bought a little cabin in the mountains that we still own. It had an unfinished basement, just cinder block. And I stumbled on Richard, who was a contractor and a builder. He was at the neighbor's house doing something. And he seemed handy, and I said, could I ask you a question? Could I finish this basement and put a door over here, even though this is a load-bearing wall? Would that work? So he said, oh yeah, you have to know what you're doing. It can be done. Any construction people here? Yeah, one, okay. So he said, yeah, it can be done. It just has to be done carefully. And I said, that's great. I really want to finish this. Would you be interested, or would you know someone who could do it? And he said, yes, I do. Me. I'm a general contractor. He handed me his card. And so we walked around and looked at it, and I said, that'd be great. It's not a big job. I just want sheetrock and hung ceiling and a door here. Let's take this garage door out and put in some windows and so on. Yes, I can do that for you. He said, but before you hire me, you should go online and see my work, just to be sure. So he gave me his card, and I said, I'll do that. Of course I didn't. I was busy. And I called him in a week or two. I said, let's get on with it. So he sent me some plans and set to work. Several weeks later, I went up to just sort of inspect the job as it was coming along. Richard was working there with a young man from Venezuela, a friend. And they were hanging sheetrock. And I had hung sheetrock in my younger days, wallboard, whatever you call it here. And I walked in and thought, oh, I never saw it hung like this before. There were no seams almost. It was so neatly and perfectly done. It looked like cabinetry. I thought, he hardly needs to use the mud and tape to smooth this over. It's amazing. So then I grabbed my iPad and looked him up. Well, it turns out that Richard had been the most sought after finest cabinet maker in Dallas, Texas, before he retired to the mountains where I live. He built 3-story libraries with circular staircases and exotic woods. He did all the big Dallas football players had him build the cabinets for their homes. He was an unspeakably fine craftsman. So I found him and said, "Richard, what's this about?" I said, I'm embarrassed. He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, you're such a fine craftsman, and I've got you hanging in sheetrock." And he smiled and says, "Yeah, I had a feeling you hadn't looked at my website." I said, "Well, I have now, and I'm embarrassed." And he said, "Well, don't be." He said, "When we moved up here, I knew I'd need to take whatever work came my way in semi-retirement." And then he said this, "And besides, even when I'm hanging sheetrock, I'm still a fine cabinet maker." Richard knew something I needed to learn. He knew the difference between his occupation, his labor, his job, his project, and his work. You see, your work is a part of who you are. Your job is just a place you do it. In our Christian imagery, we would say, the work is the wine, and the job is the wineskin. And there are times when the skin won't hold the wine, and you move around. This is often when these executives are asking, "Should I quit? Should I move to another job? Is my time up here?" That's the kind of conversation we have. Will the skin hold the wine? Are you able to do your best work here? Or is it so chafing now that you're being deformed by trying to do your work in this skin, so to speak? Now, because work and job, work and career are related but not the same thing, this message is for retired people too. What happens is we discover a work in the context of a job that might delight us, and we engage it. And over time, in the pressure and rush and difficulty and urgency of what we're doing, we confuse the two. And we end up serving the job, the context, rather than the work God gave us to do. And it's hazardous. In this book, I call it a crucible, a place of heat and pressure and reactivity and realistic byproducts sometimes, but also a place of purification, maybe even transformation. Work can be a crucible. For those of you who are retired, you may find yourselves struggling to find your identity in retirement. I'm playing with those issues, and I'm not fully retired. We over-identify with the job and lose our understanding of the enduring work we're given to do. If you're retired, you're not retired from work, you're retired from your career. There is no biblical basis for not working. Only for not having a job, maybe. You don't have to have a job. God bless you if you don't need one. But you're still expected. You will not be healthy. You will not be fully human if you don't have a work in your life. Now that work may be study and prayer and contemplation. It may be becoming the kindest grandfather in the world. It may be finally giving your wife what she deserved all along. It may be volunteering and caring for people at church. It may be taking a role that's nowhere near as prominent as the one you had and were paid for. It may be using the skills you developed when you were working for money just to help people, to serve. It may be somewhere else in the world, or some neighborhood you didn't normally traverse in your working life. Who knows? You have to find that. If you're not working, you're not fully alive. Sometimes as Christians, I think we get confused about work. I think because of the way the story, the now 2,800-year-old story of creation, of how God made us, is hard to interpret from a modern context. We misunderstand it sometimes. You remember, God created a household. Household's really important to me. He didn't create individuals, autonomous beings, and said, go make your own movie, which our culture tells us to. He created a household, a web of obligation and love, and he gave them work, stewardship of creation and one another. And when their selfishness and their distrust overcame their decision making, he visited with them in their shame and said, wow, you made a mess of it, haven't you? And because of that, cursed is the ground because of you. Do you remember that line from Genesis? It doesn't say, God didn't say, I curse you. He didn't say that. He said, because of what you've done, the ground is no longer fertile. That is, your work isn't going to be so fruitful. There's going to be toil in your life to be fully human. It won't come entirely naturally to you, as it always has. And that's where toil comes from. But he didn't leave us there, did he? He didn't leave us there. At the other end of the book, there are all these images of fruitfulness that our work is meant to live into. John 15, I am the vine, or maybe a better translation is I am the vineyard and you are the vines. Remain in the vineyard. If you remain in me, I'll remain in you, and you will bear fruit. Sometimes we read that, again, very narrowly, that you won't win souls if you're not in Christ. It's sort of an evangelism reading of it, and that's true enough. But I don't think that's the whole meaning. I think Jesus was speaking to fruitfulness, that the restoration project, the greatest rehabilitation project in the history of the universe, would be fruitful. Richard's kind of work would be fruitful as we remain in Jesus. As we remain is the same word that's used for dwell, place where you live. If we live our lives at home in the Lord, our work will be fruitful. Now, our jobs may be toilsome. They're a part of what's broken. They're context. But our work will be fruitful. Think about that a little bit. In retirement, guys, those who raised their hands, you're meant still to be fruitful. How? Where's my place in the vineyard still? And how am I to bear fruit? It's still a good question. We're given guidance about how that happens, how to make that happen. All through Scripture, if you'll read with an open mind about it. One of my favorites is Psalm 84. We sing it sometimes. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord Almighty. You know that song? It talks about how fantastic it is to worship. It's a pilgrim song, walking up to Jerusalem once or twice a year from some dirty village to worship to the home of God, where God lived on earth. You can imagine the awesome aspect to some simple villager of approaching the greatest city in the region The huge walls, the amazing temple, the music, the chanting, the smoke and strange smells of sacrifice, priests, strange clothing. I mean, the whole experience must have been awesome. In fact, the psalmist says, I wish I could just stay here. This is where I'd like to dwell. Like the sparrows that were making their nests in the little crooks of the wall of the temple. Couldn't I just live here? And then he goes on to say, but, actually our life is elsewhere. And he says this, blessed is the man whose strength is in the Lord, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. Sometimes it's translated, in whose heart are the ways of pilgrimage, is another way it's translated sometimes. Who has a pilgrim's heart. I'm journeying towards the holy. That's a pilgrim. Blessed is the man whose strength is in the Lord, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. Though he pass through the valley of Baca. Baca means desolation. There is today a valley of Baca in Israel. It's a desolate place. Though he pass through the valley of desolation, he will make it a place of springs, and the summer rains will water it. It's an image of a faithful pilgrim whose work in the world blesses others, bringing springs to the desert. That's not a fruit metaphor. If you lived in a desert country, that would really resonate. How does your work bring springs to the desert? I have one more thought for you. What is a heart with a highway design? It's the answer to a question, how do I get from here to there? How do I do that? How do I engage my work, not just my job, my work, meaning my retirement, my active life, all the things I do? How do I engage that so that it is real? John 15 says, abide in me. Right? Psalm 84 says, have a pilgrim's heart. A pilgrim's heart. Heart is an image for, in all of Scripture, for a word we don't like to use very much as modern Christians. The word is desire. What do you really, really, really want? I ask that question in my journal all the time, particularly in times of transition. As I was retiring from a job where everybody told me I was wonderful because I was the boss. And now I'm sitting alone in my office at home, and my wife's saying, when are you going to clean that bathroom? What do I really, really, really want? What's my desire? You see, God's rehabilitation project is primarily rehabilitating our desires. Disordered desire is the source of sin. Adam wanted, Eve wanted the wrong thing. What do you really want? God wants to reorder our desires. It's heart work. Remember where Jesus says it's what comes out of a man that defiles him. Out of his heart, not what he puts in. We have a work to do. So if you're wondering, if you're going to think through what's my work in the world, I can tell you your first work, your most important work, the work you must not neglect, the work you have all the tools in the world to use, though they may be rusty and cobwebbed, is your interior work. And we men, we just can't help it. We like to be busy. We like to do stuff. We like to be active. And we will avoid, if we can, being still long enough to look at ourselves in the mirror. To be still and let God join us in the stillness. to be honest with Him and do our interior work. And it's not something you do once a week or even once a day. If you want to be filled with the joy of work, I want to suggest you start by doing your interior work. Go to your workshop, however you do that, long walks, on your knees, with a prayer book, in your journal, with music, with a partner, with your wife, with somebody. However you do your interior work. The call to heart-centered work comes before the call to world-centered work. That's where you begin. When it's done well, this amazing thing can happen. So I'll finish with a poem and a song. So here's a poem that's all joy about work. I wrote this in the middle of just being joyful about the work God gave me to do. And because I'm a musician, the metaphor of the poem is music. It's called Lucky. There are times I need to pinch myself to prove this isn't just a dream. This work that reaches right down through the rich loam of rhythm and harmony to the roots of joy and shakes the whole tree of my existence with laughter and with apprehension that no matter how hard we play, this can't last. And of course, there are times when it feels like going through the motions. Not that we're phoning it in, but there just isn't anything happening. The notes are all there in the correct combinations, the right order, but there's no connection, no groove, no conversation, no jazz. But if I keep playing, keep trusting, even a hollow performance eventually serves only to intensify the real music when it happens. And it will happen. When the planets align, or the gods condescend, or the fundamental particles resonate like the wave of co-creation, which is to say, I feel so incredibly lucky to be here in the endlessly unfolding work. So lucky not to be going through the motions of all the other jobs and careers and options to which I might have been resigned. So lucky to be here with you, who also know the truth, the rush when it all comes together. And so lucky to have learned, the more I practice, the luckier I get. That interior life is your practice studio. And the music will arrive. Maybe not every day, maybe not at first. But I want to encourage you, men, retired and not retired, to go find your work, the heart of your work, discern it from your job, and practice from the heart. Let's do your labor. Your labor is not in vain, though the ground underneath you is cursed and stained. Your planting and reaping are never the same. Your labor is not in vain. and the sea it may roam. The place of your toil may not seem like a home, but your labor is not unknown. I am with you, I am with you, I am with you, I am with you. I have called you by name. Your labor is not in vain. The vineyards you plant will bear fruit. The fields will sing out and rejoice with the truth. All that is old will at last be made new. The vineyards you plant will bear fruit. I am with you, I am with you, I am with you, I am with you. For I have called you by name. Your labor is not in vain. The houses you labor to build will finally with laughter and joy be filled. The serpent that hurts and destroys will be killed. All that is broken be healed. I am with you, I am with you, I am with you, I am with you. For I have called you by name. Your labor is not in vain. Well, I am with you, I am with you, I am with you, I am with you. For I